Good morning, everybody. Couple of quick notes of housekeeping. So if your watch tells you to stand during the talk, that's fine. This is a more conversational talk. And if you have a question even, I know that can be a little bit awkward with the microphone. I'll just repeat it through the talk. While we're doing case studies, this is a less visual talk. The slides, I thought about doing it without slides. I'm a consultant. There's an international secret consulting organization that would have thrown me in jail if I did a presentation without slides. So I did do them. But the point is, it's a little bit more narrative of a talk, and so I'm happy to keep things informal. As mentioned, so I'm the AI capability lead at Centric Consulting. We provide a variety of business and technical consulting services. And one small correction, which I wouldn't even bother with, but I'm going back 10 years in case studies, so that was 12 years in data science, not that too, just to clarify for part of those projects. So I've attended this talk or this event for I think 3 or 4 years, pretty much since I joined Centric in 2019. And over the last couple of years, the themes have gone pretty heavily into enablement, right? And for anybody, I believe this was one of last year's talks. It was very good. It was kind of on the power of domain users. So if anybody remembers, there was the example given of, I forget if it was typhoid or one of the diseases, though, that was solved by a doctor, not a statistician, but the doctor had some statistician knowledge, those type of things. And I think that's the fight in data analytics that we've been having, is trying to get these tools in the hands of users in a way that they consume data. But that requires a lot of data governance, which is hard work. As Michael and Brandon said, we joke the same in consulting. We've never walked into a company and said, is your data governance solved? And they said, yep, everything's good. We don't need to talk data governance. So given that, this is a difficult challenge. I think AI steps that up. ChatGPT puts these LLMs put a lot of power in the hands of users. And so we are more rapidly facing some of the problems of how to do this safely, how to do it well, how to enable. So the purpose of this talk is to go through kind of the history of some projects that I've personally had involvement in and how things have changed and how that's impacted the users over time. So I'll give context of what I'm doing with those projects, but by all means, I'm going to use the word convolutional neural network, you do not need to understand what a convolutional neural network is to understand the point of it. So the first use case we'll talk through was 2016 to 2019. This is actually at the job I was at just prior to Centric Consulting on a deep learning team. Then we'll flash forward to a machine learning platform problem within an IT department. And then lastly, outlier detection with an LLM in a more recent use case. Then we'll talk about where enablement goes from there and some of the major issues. So Dialogue Tech was the company that I worked for prior to Centric Consulting. For anybody who follows the local tech scene, so Mongoose Metrics was acquired by a company called If by Phone out of Chicago. They rebranded the whole thing as Dialogue Tech, and that's where I was working at the time. They have since been acquired by Invoca. So they would provide businesses a way to do cross-channel marketing. So I know we used to have some folks in the room tied into marketing. So businesses that you might do advertise on a billboard, advertise on the web, but you need to have personal engagement. So law firms are examples of this, auto dealers are examples of this, things like that. So on the right, I put our favorite local injury attorney that everybody sees on billboards. So if he were to use this product, right, he's advertising online like this or on billboards, and the old marketing question, I know I'm wasting 50% of my money, I don't know which 50%, right? So in order to track that, he actually wants to know which of those advertisements resulted in phone calls within the organization. So Dialogue Tech solves that. You advertise with phone numbers that go into a business, and Invoca does this today. They go into that organization, they get rerouted to the company, and so they track the fact that that phone call took place. So for those familiar with the marketing funnel here on the right side, a phone call in that world is a conversion. They just treat that as, we generate a phone call, that's great. So problem solved, right? Anybody who answers a phone knows you get spam phone calls. This year we're getting the old, probably 90% of your phone calls are political donations. There's all kinds of problems with treating it that way. So in an ideal world, a purchase would be a conversion, or at least an interested buyer, right? And so since we were in the middle and recording the phone call, we went to look at ways that we could help solve this challenge. So our solution was to do call classification. So we'd run the recording through multi-channel. So we could actually, since we're connecting both ends of the call, we could record it as stereo audio, and the incoming caller was on one channel, the agent who's receiving the call is on another. That could be run through a transcription engine, and then we would use, again, this is 2016, 17, BERT, which is a language encoding by Google, and this was kind of the precursor. So language embeddings really are the technology that has helped enable LLMs. We could run that through a neural network and classify, and you see the classifications. You know, I picked a general example here, so interested buyer, a buyer that's maybe not interested, right? They call and they find out you're an injury attorney and they were looking for a real estate attorney or something like that, right? So that would be a not interested buyer. Other relevant calls such as support, right? Sometimes people who are looking at an ad are already a customer and they just have a follow-up question. That's not a new lead. You know, the marketing's glad the call got through, but it really wasn't what their marketing dollars were aimed at, right? Or spam, wrong number, which is a huge issue for everybody. So some of the challenges of this project, transcription engines have come a long way in recent years. In 2016, we still had a lot of accuracy problems in those transcription engines. And I guess I would add as a note on that, anybody taking public phone calls, right? People call from their cars, or they got screaming kids in the background, there's a dog barking. I mean, this is not the ideal audio you run through when you first test a transcription engine, right? The agents, especially if you get into, if you've offshored your call center or things like that, you may be dealing with heavy accents or other things like that. So there's just a number of challenges. So you're already starting off with data that has some quality concerns. Word embeddings were very new at the time, as was the idea of using a convolutional neural network to do NLP. For those maybe versed in machine learning, convolutional neural networks are typically used on images, but this was a little bit different. It's one of my favorites. The deep learning framework uses GPUs. So anybody reading about the power requirements is familiar with this. So this was ahead of the cloud providers. So before folks were figuring this out, so we actually had to buy a Titan card and have it shipped to our office. The card was like $3,000 or something like that. I forget. Put it in a server. Put it in our data center. And yes, some of the gamers in our office would regularly ask to borrow the card on the weekend in order to run their favorite games. Nowadays, that's much easier, right? Anybody dealing with this problem, Azure, AWS, you just sign up and create a GPU box and you're good to go. The last challenge too was kind of fun. We had to create a manual test set. So you want thousands of calls labeled with these categories. And so this was interesting because we actually created a small application, just a little web app that would play a phone call and give you the classifications. You would click and pick one, and then it would go on to the next phone call. We used this internally with all of our employees, and we gave out a little prize pool for whoever labeled the most phone calls. But even there, we got a ton of questions of, well, the caller said this, but then they kind of pivoted over to the support question, which one is it? It's difficult to label data. And lastly, I bolded this one and called it out to its own slide. There was a literacy issue. So we had a low-tech version where some folks had keywords that they would look for in the transcription, and it did a decent job. It was not as accurate as the machine learning model, but I would call that, in data science terms, a heuristic model. And so folks would say to us regularly, like, well, we need all this training data, and it takes so long to create and label this data. Well, let's just feed the keyword engine in. And the important thing to remember is that supervised learning by nature, like people aspire, or prescribe a certain amount of magic to machine learning, right? And they think that it's this intelligent being learning. Supervised learning is attempting to imitate exactly the labels that you give it. And so we'd regularly have to, I've fielded this conversation a number of times to say, if the machine learning model were perfect on the keyword training set, you would just replicate what the keyword training set did. So, and the keyword training sets were very easy to set up. So it was like, kind of like using the custom process you use to make a Bentley, but you're making a Civic. Like, just buy a Civic. It's gonna be cheaper than custom building your model. So those kind of things, like that's some of the literacy challenges we had. But before we talk to the overall picture, I kind of want to just reset that stage of where we were at the time of the state of the art. So this was all cutting edge. There was very clear ROI for our customers. This was a much better approximation of how much their marketing was successful, but it was expensive, very custom, and we had natural language processing PhDs on our team. And as mentioned, required a very large training set of data. So actually before I bounce to that next use case, today, if you were to do that project, so instead of building those custom models first, you could very much start with an LLM and just give it a prompt that said, I'm looking for you to classify or summarize this call with one of these 4 categories, and it would do a fairly decent job, not as probably as well as a custom deep learning model. However, you could do some fine tuning with that. You could much more, if you went to build a competitor to this, you could do it pretty quickly out of the box with all those training set requirements. And I think because people naturally understand LLMs, if you were asking even a customer to play around with those prompts and to ask some of those key questions about it, you would get a general understanding. Bouncing to the second use case. So this is internal to an IT department. This moves forward to Centric. And this is a company in the utility space, fairly large IT department, facing all the challenges that IT departments are facing, right? Cutting budgets, doing less with more, and trying to just be as efficient as possible. Their PMO had a process, so if you had a stakeholder that makes a request or has an idea for a new project or enhancement, that would come in and go to an architect. And that architect would spend 4 to 20 hours, and by the way, we took a lot of conversations to get to that range that wide, and there's still a lot of people that were arguing with that, but we settled on calling it 4 to 20 hours. Then it would go to the PMO as a stage gate, and they would decide if the project should go forward. And then, like any good PMO, they would debate and change the scope a little bit. And then it went out to a project manager who was supposed to then make a project plan and then send that on out. So, any show of hands, anyone see any glaring problems with this process? I hear a few laughs. I think we're all picking up on that, right? So if I split the difference and call that a 12-hour estimate and call that architect about $200, $2,400 invested in opportunity cost before I even do anything, right? Before I get this approved, before I know if I'm going to do anything. And then talking to the architects, they talked about a second problem, and this was that the project managers would say, well, the technical architect's done this ground-up estimate. I've got work breakdown structures and everything else. I'm good to go. I'm just going to plug that into our resource pool and go ahead and do the project. And the architect would look at it and say, well, we did that before the PMO probably made 3 or 4 changes to scope. We did that before final hardware decisions were made and a variety of other things, right? And so really the project manager was supposed to go ahead and redo that. So we looked at this process, and the PMO really cares about ROI effectively, right? What's the value of the project? What's the cost of the project? And then how does that compare to the other projects in place, right? There might be a regulatory requirement to do the project, other things like that, right? They really don't care about the work breakdown structure and whatnot. So we had a pretty large body of these, the ideas and then the estimates. And so we talked about, can we create a machine learning model to predict the cost of the project automatically, saving the architect some time. I think the architect should still quality check the output, right? There's kind of a just quick, back of the napkin looking at a project saying, hey, wait a minute, this is, plugging in a switch in a data center and you said it's $1.5 million. Like, let's not go forward with that number, right? But other than that, it should automate the process and streamline and whatnot. So the future state of it, the stakeholder makes a request, we send that through the model. Originally, we were trying to predict the entire work breakdown structure and whatnot, but as we got to talk with more groups and understand what was used where, it was clear really the value was in the cost of the project and just that. And there was really not a reason yet to create the work breakdown structure. Then the PMO prioritizes ideas, it goes to the project manager and produces, they work with the architect to produce a project plan, work breakdown structure, all of these things. And at that point, scope is relatively confirmed. So the challenges on this one, the data set was a bit messy. They had changed the format of the intake forms quite a bit over time. I see some chuckles. Probably folks have dealt with this in PMOs before, sounding familiar. So a lot of ad hoc spreadsheet sources and things like that. The biggest challenge, though, here in the middle was really this adoption. So the architect team was kind of, we were moving their cheese and changing their process. And I use the, fable here, the John Henry and the steel, drill machine. So they, were kind of convinced, this ML can't estimate this correctly. But, one of the things that I think is important in AI literacy is to keep reminding folks, if you're not doing something with ML, you're doing it with a human. And so you're not just comparing the risk to machine learning, you're comparing it to what you're doing in your process today. These architects are doing ground up, thorough estimates on a half-baked idea. There is no reason to believe that the numbers that they're producing are very accurate anyways. And in fact, a quick show of project actuals versus the original estimates proved that. And that wasn't to put a knock on the architect, right? The architect didn't have a lot of information that was discovered during the later stage gate processes. So really the key was communication and talking through this project and saying, here's your experience. You're not going to throw away these hours on a project that doesn't even get approved. You're going to have approved projects with more defined scope, and you're going to sit down with the project manager. They're going to be more responsible for the work breakdown plan and whatnot, and you can, as an architect, not be estimating switch installs. You can spend more valuable time within the organization. While it's code heavy, talking about the state of the art here a little bit, this is a pretty traditional use case. Forecasting prediction is not the world's most challenging ML to do. There was a clear ROI. We will talk on the next use case a little bit about capturing the ROI. There's a difference between seeing that there's clear ROI and knowing what that ROI is. We did leverage a platform. In this case, this was built on Databricks. So comparing to the last project, the prior project, any kind of ML ops, deployments, model versioning, that was all done by hand. Just at the tail end of that project was AWS was rolling out things like SageMaker, and there were other tools that we could have adopted and ported our stuff over to. We'd already written it, and it was working for us. So at that point, so we had hand-rolled our own ML ops. In this case, model versioning, deployment, workflow, this is all built into the Databricks platform, so that was nice. This was much less expensive, still some custom code and ML engineering, but not nearly as large of a team. And we had a training set. So fast forward again, use case number 3. So this client is also an energy utility, but a field services company in a very different use case. So their job is they inspect valves out in the oil and gas space and help decide, do they need serviced? And for oil and gas companies, these inspections are required. They have to be reported up to regulatory agencies, and obviously just worker safety and all kinds of reasons, right, that you want to do this. Their forms are coming in from field techs, right? They're working on portable devices, be it a tablet or other, they used to do these using a more like custom Palm Pilot-like device out in the field. They are, physically inspecting large valves. I have my picture here in the background. So, it's easy to fat finger a number to get something confusing. And it's a relatively open text form field. So as we do that, we are just discovering all kinds of data messes. So if you have a column that says, was this part inspected? Instead of yes, no, or true, false, some people would yes, some people would yeah, some people would put their initials that they did it, some people would put a date that they did it, some people, so forth, so on and so forth. Free-form data is messy, right? So that was definitely a challenge we had to work through. And the quality control person has a large amount of experience here in domain knowledge, and they're using a library of documents, the specifications on the valves, from a variety of manufacturers over a variety of years. Some of these valves are 40 and 50 years old, so these are paper manuals that have been scanned in as PDFs, those kinds of things. So the real two challenges, if you fork the project into two areas, was both extracting that data from the document library I was just talking about, but then also applying those in a probabilistic way. And what I mean by that, so if a valve is supposed to be between, a PSAI value is supposed to be between 100 and 200, and the reading in the form says 225, that doesn't mean it's a bad form, right? It just means that the valve was out of spec. It could be a bad form, it could not be a bad form, right? If the value is 5,000, you might begin to suspect that somebody fat fingered something. But it's a guess. It's probabilistic, and it's already, that's why humans are looking at this, so it's a difficult challenge. So we had to tackle both of those. So for the first one, we did turn to an LLM. OCR, optical character recognition, technology is great. It has its use place. There's services on all the cloud providers that do this, but it really struggles, right? It expects a relatively consistent format and then puts out a very complex format. They have, this isn't a data governance issue. It's not this company's fault that those specifications are in a bunch of different formats. They simply, their customers have valves from a bunch of different manufacturers spanning the course of 6 decades. There's no way to make that uniform. So the LLMs performed strikingly well. Frankly, it's how we won the project. In the conversation, the demo, we actually just live in conversation ran one of their specifications through and asked it for data that was in a technical drawing within the document. It not only extracted it well, but our business user on the other side of the table actually said, it pointed out a couple things that if you'd asked me what was important in that doc, I would have missed. And so they quickly said, we believe in the power of this, that this can do that. I guess just quickly on that, I would say we are seeing that across, there's a number of organizations, right, that intake paper or scanned forms that have, be it from customers, be it from vendors, that have a variety of formats. It's just a really good use case there. So on the historical inspection for the probabilistic manner, so for this, we just looked at outlier detection. It's by far the most efficient way to do this. This is a tried and true statistical method. We put the data in, so we get a little math nerdy here, to put everybody to sleep, but high dimensional format, compress that down, and then go ahead and say, effectively, if you only had one dimension, right, you're thinking of your bell curve here, if how many standard deviations out you are, that's how likely you are an outlier. It's a little fancier than that. We're doing it with more support vector machines, but it's the same idea. So some other challenges or literacy challenges we had in this one. So LLMs in particular are probably the closest thing we've seen, maybe I'd argue some reinforcement learning with self-driving cars, to artificial general intelligence, Skynet, right? The Hollywood AI, right? And so people, again, sort of ascribe a certain amount of magic to what an LLM can do. And so, for example, I think we had 3 or 4 conversations with the team on the other side that we could not automatically correct the form, for example. Like when somebody fat fingers a number, we have no earthly idea what was inside their mind as to what number that they meant to put in or what form value that they meant to put in. AI is smart, it is not that smart. You can heuristically think of some things, right? Like of the, if the value is 2,500 and then 200 is a more reasonable range, maybe they added a 0 at the end, but you start playing those kind of guessing games and you're asking for trouble. However, we came back and said, in order to help the quality control person deal with the escalation, you certainly could, the traditional statistical models are explainable, meaning that we can say, these are the 3 or 4 fields that really drove us to say that this is an outlier. So we could narrow down a large and complicated form and say, here's where I would start if I were you. There was an ethical question in this one. Our business stakeholder, part of the reason I anonymized this use case, was a little bit cagey about who we talked to within the organization. It seemed fairly clear to me that they looked at this as a workforce reduction opportunity. We never positioned AI as that, right? We positioned it as we're trying to automate the non-value creation or work that can be automated, and you have subject matter experts. And in this case, I think it was really true. I mean, these are folks that had done the field inspection work themselves, gotten promoted into the office to help the folks into the field. They had years and years worth of knowledge about how these valves work and things like that. That is not the team that I would look at for cutting if I'm looking for workforce reductions. And to me, that's just never the point of technology. As consultants, you have to draw that fine line of respecting what they're doing with their business plans, but we're certainly not enabling or encouraging that. And so that was a fine line to walk. Assuming that they took our advice and they kept those folks, I said we would circle back to this. They know what they spent on the project. How do you capture ROI in this situation, right? I know I've created value. I know that those quality control people no longer have to do nearly as much manual work. But what are they doing with the rest of that time? And how do we capture that? That a lot of AI use cases right now are about workforce efficiency. And workforce efficiency is really hard to measure, right? For the cynical folks in the room, you'll say, well, if I just spent 200 grand on a project and created more coffee breaks, I didn't really achieve my goals this year, right? The optimistic folks might say, well, that's more time to be innovative, more time to learn, more time to experiment around the organization. And so those are the kind of arguments you have within a team when you're trying to capture this ROI. On the literacy note, I pulled this in. The intent isn't to do AI literacy here, but this was an example we used with a customer, and I really like, even if it doesn't land or if this is something you already know, it just kind of serves as an illustration of how we try to find relatively simple conceptual things that can help clarify a concept. So a lot of people struggle with how LLMs work, and I have used this, I think, in 3 talks now with a variety of topics. I love this diagram. So this is a writer from Ars Technica, Benj Edwards. And when you blow it up, I think he tweeted it out, and then it was an article. Both of the pictures were small, so up on the wall here, everyone's probably thinking you've got to go back to the eye doctor. The writing isn't important. The boxes are, and we'll talk through that. So how an LLM works, that initial red box is the first prompt that the user uses. That's the question that they ask, right? So you can see that in this case, it's the square root of 17. I've been to the eye doctor recently. The square root, LLM responds with what the square root is. But notice that's not boxed. That's just what the user sees. Then the user asks a follow-up question of what is it exactly? That's boxed because that is what is sent back to the LLM. Not the question, the conversation. And that's why LLMs are as powerful as they are, because they have the context of the entire conversation. So what it's trying to respond is, okay, given someone has a conversation's going on with everything in that blue box, what is the next logical response? It is not, at least in the case of early LLMs, actually doing the mathematical calculation. And so wacky answers can ensue, right? They are getting better. They're bringing in like reinforcement learning and the new OpenAI 01 model, for those who have read about it, and adding other things kind of like agents and other APIs that allow it to do, hey, this is a math problem, let me send that out to Wolfram or whatnot, and actually do that. But it is about completion. And once you understand that, you start putting a little less magic in the AI, and it's helpful to then roll back the expectations to this is what it's actually doing. And just as a side note, for those who are confused or have heard the term hallucination, when you look at this, there's a limit on the size of the box. And so at some point, as your conversation keeps going, something at the top falls out of that limit, and now it has less context. So if my very first instruction was, I'm going to ask you code questions and only answer in Python, and then I ask enough questions, at some point that context bound doesn't contain the text, answer these only in Python. And so then it might actually say, well, you asked about how to implement this function, here it is in Python, here it is in Java, here it is in Scala, right? And the user says, wait, I told you only to answer in Python. Why are you answering with 3 different languages? That's how you get hallucination. I guess just to put a bow on that, our point there was this was a powerful tool. I talked about the users kind of wanting to self-correct, and that gave us a chance to say, this is what this is doing. It really doesn't solve that problem you're talking about. So the state of the art during this is effectively, this is ongoing near the end project, is the current state of the art. So we did leverage generative AI. There was clear ROI, though again, hard to capture. It's still fairly expensive, but much less so than our fully custom models. This did include a custom model, right, the outlier model, and required an ML engineer for that. But adoption was pretty straightforward for business users. So bouncing to kind of where AI enablement's going. Again, this is that concept that it really leapfrogged a lot of other tools. So data governance has just been such a problem and a catch-up tool. LLMs deal nicely with messy and unstructured data. So it's papering over some of those sins a little bit, but people are realizing if you're gonna get more and more performance out of that, catching up your data governance is a good idea. And so, but this enablement and empowerment is going a long way, where enablement even pre-LLM meant teaching a user Power BI or those types of things. Now we're seeing that a copilot can go into Power BI and allow you to ask natural language questions and get reasonable answers. That capability's been there for a while with Power BI, but anybody who used it before, Copilot knows it was sketchy at best. The LLMs have made that far improve. Traditional platforms, Salesforce, Tableau, these types of things are building in more and more of the AI as well. And then image and video generation. This image here is actually from Sora, the OpenAI video generation here. Not video, it's a screen cap of it, but that's what we're looking at. This was, so everything there is not real. That was, prompt was something like, show me a modern woman in a commercial area of Asia, shopping, and this was the video that was generated out of it. Give me one sec here. So, while the tools are getting better, and abstracts some of the technical challenge away, it also puts more power in the hands of folks. And so, we see the challenges of governance and a balance of, they have power to potentially expose customer data, they have power to misuse AI, right? So we regularly talk when we do AI literacy and adoption courses, we talk with folks about some of those horror stories, right? The ones in the news that are sort of most famous are the, selling a plane ride for $1 or selling a truck for $1, those type of things. Which, by the way, if you work in a company that's done that, it's amazing to me. Those cases have gone to court. It's unbelievable. Like, that's just the cost of doing AI, right? So that should be like hey, we're adopting AI. We made a mistake. Congratulations, this guy gets a truck for $1. Taking that person to court does not seem like the right approach to me for that, but that's an aside. But we do have much worse examples of this, right? So a story that often we use as an example of this, so Rite Aid did surveillance technology that was using AI to say, should a person be asked to leave the store? And the users weren't trained on it very well. They were doing incorrect things like pointing the technology at a grainy security camera footage and other things like that. Ended up disproportionately, it was wrong, and it was disproportionately affecting folks of various protected classes. And so Rite Aid now has a consent decree not use AI facial detection for the next 5 years. And a pretty good case of mud in their eye for misusing it like that. Obviously a reputation hit. So we have to think about how we're using these things as the tools become more powerful. I also think in our world, we run into a lot of, we want to do AI, or my CEO has told me we have to do AI in the next 6 months. We still encourage folks to start with a practical business problem and then ask if AI can be a part of the solution. The opposite of the, build it and they will come, we want to do that backwards. And then we encourage demystifying the tools, as kind of discussed with the LLM example. Lastly, I do want to say I do think there's a disproportionate enablement for small organizations. So bouncing back to this for a second, this video generation, I think this is a good example. So if I'm working for the modern Don Draper firm that has all kinds of money in marketing, and we're pitching for Coca-Cola, right? I have the assets to go out and just film a pilot commercial and take that in. But if I'm a mom and pop marketing firm, I don't have those same assets, right? Or I'm filming it on an iPhone with volunteers. But if I can convey my idea through generating an AI video, I could probably level the footing to where now it's who has the best idea wins. And now those resources advantage isn't so heavy for the large firm. I think it doesn't mean that large firms can't use AI, but they already have efficiencies of scale that AI can provide for smaller firms. Some of the challenges and ways to approach this, obviously AI literacy I've talked a lot about already. I won't get into that as much. AI governance, starting just like anything else, having policies, procedures, and teams in place to deal with these changes. And it has to be an ongoing living group because those changes are going to come about all the time. AI is changing every day. A quick point I would make on that is folks look at to reiterate that risk of what the AI could do, not understanding that the human could do that today. So just talked to a customer this week that said, oh, if the AI did that, we couldn't test the output. And I did ask them the question of, well, can you test the people who are doing that today? And a few light bulbs went off. I think we can bounce forward here to say, so I think less and less custom code is required, but more user training is required. So we see the cost and the effort going down, but the ability to leverage and how quickly it can impact your org is going up. So some of that, there's, as we say, more surface areas for mistakes. So going back to that risk of a human versus the AI, both can make mistakes. The human might make 7 mistakes an hour. The AI might make 100,000 mistakes an hour. So that risk total volume can go up. So I will show this out for anybody who wants. I put a couple of the key. So we use the NIST AI framework a lot in conversations about literacy and setting up the governance org. The How ChatGPT Works article, that's where that comes from, and then OpenAI Sora. But I think we're close to time, but I don't know if anybody has any questions they would like to ask or experiences that you've had. Yeah, so we have an accelerator that can work with a variety. In that case, we are using GPT, but within a tenant, so it's not being sent out for retraining. Yep.
Just curious, in your PMO example for the IC work intake, what did the input data look like? Was it just like written out for customer requirements? Or?
Yeah, so the question was, what did the intake data look like for the PMO project? So it was a list of questions. It started as a list of questions that was about 30 or 35. We actually, as a part of this project, they had been looking at revisiting it. We cut it down to about 22 and then had it be multiple choice as many places as we could, just to better feed the ML project. And frankly, to roll back, people were putting a level of precision that they didn't know it there, and it was better to actually say, just give me a rough range of certain things. Good question. Any others? Oh, looks like somebody back there.
So, as someone who works in data governance and trying to get, obviously when you have a large organization with people inputting data in various ways, and trying to enforce a standard, how strict does the standard have to be necessarily for an AI model to really be effective in getting the most out of it?
92.5%. Yeah, those are the type of answers we get often when we ask our customers, what the accuracy is going to be. So there's a couple ways you can look at that. I think for a traditional ML model, the most important thing is actually just get it running end to end. While I hope we're in our user group, I love building custom models. If you can do something out of the box with like Azure ML or things like that, to just show that you can get an actionable result in time and have the user intervene, you're 9/10 of the way there. That you've proven value. Then the question becomes, okay, how can I then deal with accuracy? I think too, then you have to look at what's the accuracy of the existing process today. So often people overestimate how accurate their existing process is. So to go to the deep learning example, the very first one. So if you're a customer that didn't use anything, you were treating all phone calls as conversions. That's an easy lift off of that, right? If you're using the keywords, maybe you can estimate that that's 60% accurate or something like that, and so that's really what you're targeting to be. So then you have the question of, it is a custom ML project, engagements had a cost to it, was it worth the extra percentage? I think the best thing you can do, if you can get it to dollars, in that case, we would try to convert it to what were your sales from these campaigns prior and what were your sales after, and what was the payoff period of the project. You can't always do that, especially in the worker efficiency cases. On that part, like a more internal, like Copilot use case or those type of things, it's really situational to the project, right, and what the risk is. If it's going to help a new employee better explore the knowledge base, but occasionally give a little misleading, that's probably good enough. If it's, we had one customer that wanted to use GPT real time to translate legal documents. We were like, not real time. That's a great start, and then run it, give it to somebody who knows the language and the law, and have them translate from there, right? I kid about it, but like, they had the right idea. It was an opportunity to automate. They just had to get to the right solution. So sorry, it depends is the unfortunate consulting answer. Anything else? Okay, I think we're ready for the next one. Thank you for the chance to speak here.